uh, put the demand. They have to create the system. The government should be willing and forced to deliver the resources and the facilities over there. So basic point.
No doubt about it. I think, politicians are responding to what they see as the demands of the people, which will get them the votes if it is met. But you will have situations, I think, like happened in Tamil Nadu, if I'm not mistaken, where despite all the electoral promises and the fact that the population benefited from the distribution of free gifts in various places, they went and voted exactly in the way that they wanted to vote. But that comes from the empowerment of the population and the awareness, etc., that needs to be created. So it is a process that has to be put in place, but we need to give adequate attention to communicate with people. What are the challenges? How do you address them? How does it affect you? What is the short term? What is the long term? There is not enough of and this is not true only in India. I mean, this is true even in the US. One of the things that we fight with them about in the US is the response on climate change is so poor because there is almost no effort that is made in the country to educate the public on what are the challenges, because to a large extent they are not concerned about it. They have the ability to adapt. We don't have the ability to adapt. We are much, much more vulnerable. So while we may not be responsible for the problem, we would definitely suffer as a consequence. So I think there are these differences and we have to be able to communicate very clearly on it. Let me just quickly finish this. Maybe I won't spend too much time. This is just coming back to the issue of energy access. We took the NSSO data and we plotted it in terms of energy consumption, biomass energy consumption. And then we just put those two arrows that you see over there. The green one is talking about useful energy consumption. The Advisory Board on Energy in the mid-1980s had come up with a different definition of energy poverty. And they said that we would consider everybody below 620 kilocalories per household per month, if I remember right, as the benchmark for energy poverty. So we converted that into an annual thing. So that's the green line, and this is the income poverty level that we have on the red. And you will see that there is almost an equal number of people in quadrant 2 who are not income poor but are still biomass dependent, as there are in quadrant 3 who are both biomass dependent as well as income poor. So to a large extent, this is just another complication of the problem of energy access. Again, in our minds, we have energy access equals LPG delivery, for example, or energy access equals connection to the grid. Not necessarily the case. We have these resources. There are some in this scatter diagram. We have some states that are rich in biomass but income poor. Jharkhand may be a good example. There are others that are income rich but don't have biomass and have supply constraints as far as some of the other fuels are concerned. So access is also a function of the physical availability of resources and your infrastructure and everything else that goes along with it. Yesterday we had visitors in the evening from Shell Foundation. Shell is one of the global entities that also does a lot of this global scenarios work, projecting into the future and everything, and we were having a discussion on some of these issues. And Mr. Suman Berry, who used to be Director General of the National Council of Applied Economic Research, is now working with them. He was there. And he was asking, what do we see as the future for cooking energy, given that 650 to 700 million people or more do not have access to clean cooking energy? Is it LPG? And in my view, and again we can debate this, for us LPG is not the solution. We don't have, we are rationing LPG in urban areas. You can definitely challenge me and say, why should LPG not be given on a priority basis to rural areas and we go on to consume biomass? Processed fuel used in more efficient cook stoves. Why should we say that we will consume whatever little LPG is available and ask the rural areas to consume biomass, even if we were to provide processed biomass in highly efficient cook stoves that will take up efficiency levels from the current level of about 10% to almost 40–45%. But there are a number of questions that come into play.
Ma'am, it is surprising that the country with the largest cattle population in the world is has been quite slow in pushing biogas in a big way. So I think very few states, I know Kerala is an exception, but then other than that, I know very few states are pushing it in an extremely big way.
Yeah, we had actually major programs on both biogas plants as well as on improved cook stoves. Things change over a period of time, and I think it is time for us to evaluate the whole biogas program once again and reintroduce it. The challenges, and these were evaluated at the time when the program was brought to a close as well, and the challenges that there were was, yes, while we do have a very large cattle population, this is not stall-fed population. This is population that is allowed to roam freely in the forests, on agricultural lands, in urban areas. You see them all over the place. And while animal dung, cow dung, is an important source of energy, the whole process of collecting that and then making it available centrally is a huge challenge, one. Second is, while in total numbers we have a large cattle population, ownership per household was low. It was not at the level that was required to sustain one biogas plant per household. So what it required was more of the community biogas plants, but we were not able to put in place the institutional mechanisms for sharing these resources, given all the problems that we have of caste differences, class differences, etc., etc. So the whole issue of equity in both getting access to the input resource as well as sharing the output resource institutionally became a huge challenge. But I think from the 20 years when we were talking about the last major biogas program to now, we have made a lot of progress. And I think it is time, I think Dr. Kirit Parekh will also talk about it. He's a strong advocate of biogas plants. But I think there is scope for us to revisit that. Yeah.
Ma'am, when we talk about energy access and when we are talking about lighting a billion lives, I have been associated with lighting a billion lives for the past 1 year as an intern or as a volunteer. I've always thought about this, and I guess there's no person better than you to answer it. When you talk about energy access, instead of that, access to lighting and not energy. So is that considered internationally as the people that have been provided with electricity or with access to energy or with access to lighting? Or is that not maybe considered as people who have gotten the solar charging station? Are they being considered as people who have access to electricity, access to lighting, or access to energy?
It's a difficult question. No easy answers. That's what I made reference to earlier. The question that came back in this particular conference was, how do you measure and how do you create accountability? And how do you ensure that the resources that have been spent are actually getting the service that we want? In the case of TERI, that is implementing the Lighting a Billion Lives program, we are in a sense privileged to be able to do that, because it's outside of the government. And while we do, and since you have been associated with the program, everything that we do in the best of intents, we don't have to go back to Parliament and say, this is what we have done, and prove it and account for every single paise in the same manner as I think government officials have to do. So for them, they need the more tangible outputs rather than have provided the service kind of an output. Having said that, at a global level, there is now a tremendous amount of effort to try and see how is it that we can define the metrics so that we are able to deal with the provision of service as equivalent of providing access rather than the delivery of energy into the homes, which is measurable. So it is not a mean challenge, and it's something that I think we are spending a fair degree of effort on. Don't have the answers as yet.
Ma'am, coming to the awareness among the people and the adaptability among citizens of India, what often makes me wonder is it the power of excessive wealth among citizens of India that is diminishing their rational attitude towards saving energy or probably using it to the extent only what is required? Like if I'm able to pay, if I have excessive wealth and I'm able to pay for the excessive usage of electricity, so I'll use it to the extent I'm able to pay. But instead of subsidizing energy in urban areas, it should be supplied free of cost to the rural areas, because we are able to pay and they won't be able to. So I think the amount of wealth is also what is determining the excessive demand and the shortage of the energy uses.
Yes, you're right. But how do you translate that into meaningful result is a challenge, because as you said, we are able to pay a much higher price, and while that is not going to save energy, it might empower certain sections of society, and we are able to translate that. And it's a good thought, but if you look at what happens in reality, petrol prices I mentioned earlier, good example of how we come down on the streets. In Delhi, a 10 paise increase in electricity prices was not allowed, and even people like our friend, what's his name, Roshan, was out on the streets in protests in these areas. If LPG price goes up, we are unhappy. We, 50 rupee increase in price of LPG, and again, people protest starts and politicians respond. But we spend 50 rupees in a parking lot in MGF to go and see a movie. We have no problems with that. So again, it's an issue of mindsets, one. And second is, to some extent, I think we have been spoilt. We have been spoilt into thinking that the provision of some of these utility services, in particular, electricity, water, road transport, etc., is the responsibility of government. It has to be given to us. It's our right to these services that have to be provided. Unless that mindset changes and we are willing to pay the price, it's going to be extremely difficult to change these situations. The electricity utility sectors, and I've been associated with them, as you heard, lament the fact that in the last several years, even the price of bread has gone up from 8 rupees to 18 rupees. So on a daily basis, you're probably, for those of us who consume bread, the cost can go up by almost 10 rupees a day. But we're not allowed to increase the price of electricity or of water. So I think there are many challenges that have to be addressed, and we need to do it. What else can I say? Yes, sir.
As you have mentioned earlier also, the case of Japan, that the community itself, Japanese community, took the initiative and reduced their total energy consumption. Personally, I was also able to get the same information, but I just want to add the statistics that the whole Japan power supply, the government, before doing it, told that if we cut down the total nuclear power of the country, we won't be able to supply the 100% energy. We'll be able to supply just the 50 to 60% of the total energy.
Right.
And they said that there will be power cuts. But in practice, when this thing happened, due to the conscience of Japanese people, they were able to, they suppressed their total energy consumption by 40%, rather cutting out the power. So there were rarely very few power cuts, or in some areas there were none. So they sustained that effort of cutting down the nuke power, and they sustained on it. But in India, we see that in Japan it is possible that they can sustain and survive on 40% lesser power. 40% power lesser for a country is a very, very huge number. It is not a small amount. Then, so in India, we are not totally electrified. That means 100% of India is not having the electricity. Only few privileged are having it. But there are many areas in India, especially the metros, where electricity is a privilege. It is available to all. And we see it's wasted in metros because we have plenty of it. That means the area in a country where the resources are more, we are exploiting it. And at the same time, we are having the areas where we are not having the resource available. We are planning to, say, electrify more parts of the rural India which are not electrified yet. But don't you think that there should be some plan so that we can improve the efficiency or reduce the wastage in a metro or electricity abundant area where electricity is wasted? Because if it is wasted, that means the wastage level is quite high. We can reduce it up to 20 to 30%, as in cases of metro. If we are able to
save that 20 or 30% of the energy, I guess the efforts will be efforts of electrifying the India will pick up the speed much more than which we are targeting right now. But if this thing doesn't happen or doesn't start from now, I guess the more people, if we are creating unresponsible consumers, I think we will be in the mess because the consumer base will grow in coming few years.
Yeah.
But I feel so that there are no planning or implementation for doing this. So I guess the energy requirement in the future, which will be more than what we are seeing at.
No, you're right. I think we do need to do a lot more. The Japanese society is unique in the world, I think, in their discipline and in their civic consciousness. They act, for them, it is society first and me next. For us, it is me first and society later. So I think that there's a huge difference over there, and we saw that response at the time of the disaster itself. But I think that the larger point that you're making on energy efficiency and creating responsible consumers is extremely important. At some time during the course of the year, I do intend to invite Dr. Ajay Mathur, who is the Director General of the Bureau of Energy Efficiency, to come and talk to us about some of the initiatives that they are taking and the challenges in designing and implementing some of the programs. So it's not that nothing is being done. We are probably not seeing it enough at an individual level. There's a lot of outreach that is there for the industries and commercial institutions. But there are, as I said, a lot of things that are being done also at an individual, for appliances and so on, which are all still voluntary standards. We haven't made them mandatory as yet, and that's where I think it would be useful to understand from him what are the challenges in doing so. So we will organize that in the coming few weeks and invite him to come and share his perspectives with you. Let me just quickly finish this. When we talk about creating an enabling environment, we have to be able to provide technology choices, and then the question that comes up is, do we have the technology choices to offer? We have been talking about the people who don't have access to energy in their homes. 60% of our industrial activity in the country is in the small and medium enterprise sector. We can expect that the 50%, if I take an average of 30 and 70, of people who are below the poverty line, as we push them up the development ladder, will start small businesses, small enterprises, etc. They would also need energy to be able to drive this. Do we have the choices that they can make? Even the existing small and medium enterprise sector, there is almost nobody that has invested in improving the technologies that they're using. We have worked in a few sectors, so I can say that with some level of confidence. Colleagues of ours in TERI have worked with the bangle making industry. Lots of us go and buy bangles, glass bangles. There was Tej just now, I think we must have seen that as well. Cups, mugs, the pottery industry, there's a huge amount of energy that is consumed in all of these types of industry, which is small industry. And almost no effort has gone into improving their technologies and the energy efficiency of their technologies. And you can identify many, many of these clusters across the country where there's a huge potential, but we have to be able to give those technology choices. And these are activities, maybe not the bangle industry, but the pottery industry, common to a lot of developing countries. So there has to be an effort not only at a national level, but also at an international level. We have to be able to develop the financial mechanisms. You were part of the Lighting a Billion Lives program. How do people access credit? Today, there's a lot that is being done in India on the whole issue of financial inclusion and on providing credit facilities and so on. But in the absence of that in a number of other developing countries, and also in a number of areas still in India as well, how do people access financial resources to be able to make even the small investments that they are looking for? Business models have to be created. I spoke about disconnects in supply chains and so on. They have to be created. Institutional and human capacities have to be developed, and this is a major challenge that there is. I did give the example of the Lighting a Billion Lives program. But one of the arguments that I made at an international level, would love to get some feedback on this, is that we need to create an enabling environment which will require a national commitment in the form of a national mission. Because the whole institutional dimension is not a mean challenge once again. We have different ministries that are dealing with different parts of the energy sector. We have coal, oil and gas and renewable energy. We have certain aspects of electricity that are covered at the central level, others that are at a state level. And then if you move apart from energy into related sectors, agriculture wants energy, industry wants energy, buildings require energy. Each one of them has the potential for saving energy. How do you come to an integrated strategy for the country that builds in all of these aspects and makes partners of everyone that is associated with it, so that we take it forward in the direction in which we want, and we are not all pulling in our own individual directions? So we had the telecom mission, which is still cited under Sam Pitroda as a major success. And is there something like that we need for energy? I think that's a question we need to ask ourselves. Metrics of energy access as part of human development indicators was another proposal. India has also adopted the human development indicators. Every state in the country comes out with human development indicators. Why should energy access not be included in that particular metrics? Why should we not measure ourselves in terms of how inclusive we are in creating this major developmental opportunity? It's a question that Ashok Khosla also asked yesterday, I think. I'm not going to go through all of this, and we'll just finish with this slide, largely because we are out of time. I have a couple of others, but not important. Just to be able to say that typically we talk about basic human needs, which is what I was referring to, cooking, lighting. We need productive needs and we need modern needs. And it's not necessary that we move in this direction, as again Mr. Khosla showed yesterday in that very nice picture. A woman who has nothing with her at home has a TV set, because they recognize the value of information. And then there are a number of programs that Doordarshan, for example, provides on the educational side as well. It is an opportunity to grow, to get integrated. Depending on where you're looking at it from, a positive or a negative, is that it also creates an aspiration level in people to want to do better. They know that they can do better than where they are, and it gives them a sense of the rights that they have available to them. So there are a number of drivers that can be triggered, the triggers that can be created through the provision of energy, and I think that's something that we need to be able to take a look at. Let me just stop here. As I said, the idea was basically to give you an overview and a taste of the kinds of issues that we are facing in the energy sector. This is just the beginning. There is a whole range of other issues that can be spoken about, and I can see that you're wearing your Stop Corruption t-shirt. Okay. But if there are any further questions, I would be happy to take. I think we have time for a couple of them.
Ma'am, my question too is a very general one, something which Mr. Ashok said yesterday. He gave the example of Bhutan. Bhutan has kind of said no to everything that's happening outside and decided on its own policy that we will do what we feel is right. You just said, actually I just wanted to cross-check also. You said our Prime Minister, sir, he said a statement regarding the development and developed nations that पहले आप करें, आप अपना decline करें the energy consumptions, then we will. So is this what he said? Is this what he meant? That first you go, if you've done some mistakes, you've raised it, you've challenged the climate, you've got damage to the climate, now you take the initial steps, then we will follow you.
That is precisely what he said. But he did not say that we are not going to take any action of our own. He said that in the context of international accountability and international pressures. So we are taking a number of actions on our own in the country. You might say it is adequate or inadequate, but I think the two need to be made distinct. There is a difference between making a commitment at an international level that you have to adhere to, and there is a difference in taking domestic action because domestic priorities define that. So the two are not necessarily completely exclusive sets.
All right, thank you, ma'am.
Okay, so Thank you very much. Thank you also for the questions. It was a pleasure interacting with you. Thank you.